Well, Bill, thank you very much. I appreciate that kind introduction. My name is Kathy Neset, and I am from Tioga, and I am a geologist. So geologists can do reclamation, right? Commissioner Goring, thank you for being here with us. It's great to have you in the room, and we appreciate that. This is a lot. We have a lot of stuff to go through. I'm going to take, just so you know, that's my cool building up at Tioga. Everybody, of course, I'm sure knows where Tioga, North Dakota is, right? All right, good enough for me. Stratigraphic column. I want to start here because, we're talking and listening to all these speakers today, and what's going on, everything, at least when you're a geologist in Tioga, North Dakota, it all revolves around this geologic jackpot is what we've referred to, Commissioner Goring. How much, not every state in the nation is having the discussions that we are having. You have to remember how special this is to be here in North Dakota and what we have going on. And a lot of this revolves around coal beds. We know about our coal beds and how they're situated. CO2 storage. I have some pieces of rock up here. This one right here is part of the Broom Creek Formation. This stuff, I've been carrying it around in a little sample bag, and you know what it's doing? It's falling apart into little tiny pieces of sand. It is so friable and so porous. This is where we are putting the carbon dioxide for permanent sequestration underground. Somewhere between 5,000 to 6,000 to 7,000 feet deep is where this formation is. It has to have a certain amount of total dissolved solids and saline in the natural water in that formation in order to accept the CO2, which over time, millions of years, will turn back into a solid form underground. That is permanent sequestration that we will be doing. I assure you, I will link all of this story to reclamation, Aaron, somewhere, okay? We also have oil and gas. Why are we even having so many companies and so many people interested in doing business in North Dakota? Because we have developed the Bakken. We have developed the oil and gas that has put us the number 3 producing oil and gas producing state in the nation. We are on the map. And we have a lot going on. And that energy resource is what helps support and builds out and draws all these data centers. They are not going everywhere in this country. They want to come to North Dakota because we have the support. We have the business-friendly climate. We also have the oil and gas that's in place. And we've proven that. Just this past year, last summer, we did a well. It was called the Halite Number 1. This was with money that was put aside by the North Dakota legislature to understand salt cavern development underground for storage. This would be underground storage of gases, liquids, whether it's natural gas coming off the wells that you would then use as a feedstock to go ahead and generate electricity, or for whatever reason, it may be a petrochemical plant that then develops different components of the breakdown in the refinery process, and before they ship them out, they need to store them. So, of course, in my wisdom, I asked, why don't you just do, storage on the surface? Number one, cost. It's much more cost effective to store underground in salt caverns. And keep in mind, when I'm talking about salt caverns, we're talking about bedded salts, so layers of salts. That Charles Formation, you have the Spearfish, we have the Pine, Dunham, Opeechee, and Charles Formation. The Charles Formation, when we drill down through it, has upwards of 200 feet of bedded salt. I mean, that's incredible. And why do we have these salts? Is because at one point we were an ocean. We were underwater. How do we know that? Because of the fossil assemblage and the rocks that we're looking at as we drill down through these formations. Geologists like me catch samples of the rock. We used to do it every 10 feet of drilling. Now they drill so fast, we do it every 50 feet or 100 feet, a sample. We look at that rock, we see the fossils, we know what was here. You go ahead and you determine if that salt is a good enough salt that it would make an underground storage facility, and you do it by a salt solution. pumping water down, building a big cavern, and then, provided you have a good cap rock and a basement rock, you then have a storage vessel. Where do they do this? We've always heard about the salt domes in Louisiana. Well, those are naturally occurring. What we're going to do is we are going to, and we already, cored this salt and did this for the state of North Dakota, working with UND's, oops, sorry guys, UND's Energy and Environmental Research Center. So let's talk a little bit more. I still say you come back to the whole reason we're having these conversations to the extent that we are is because of the Bakken Formation. I have, when you're a geologist, your kids bring you rocks instead of flowers. When you're a geologist, you carry those rocks with you for the rest of your life. This is Bakken. You guys, if you want to come up and take a look at these rocks afterwards, this rock is 360 million years old. I mean, just that in itself, you should touch it, This is the middle Bakken. This is what we're getting the oil out of. And I know you can't all see it, but if you look at the sidewalk outside, it looks a whole lot like this. There's no holes in it. This is not like a piece of Swiss cheese. This is not even a rock that I can find holes, in the samples. This is middle Bakken. This is what we get the Bakken oil out of. This rock, this black shale, is above it, middle Bakken, lower shale. They call it an Oreo cookie because it looks like, the picture of it looks like an Oreo cookie. We drill in the cream in the middle part and we get the oil out of it. Unrefined oil, right there, straight out of a Bakken oil well. That's what it looks like. The magic is, how do you get that oil out of a rock that looks like that? It's amazing. It's all that crazy thing we all heard about called fracking. You crack the rock open with water, you go ahead and make these are hydraulic fracks that then you allow the oil to flow to the surface and pump it to the surface. So, I mean, I'm really, obviously, the Bakken has done a lot for the state of North Dakota, but we as citizens of North Dakota, I think, have done exactly what we need to do. We come into rooms like this, we learn what's going on, and then we turn around and we take care of our resources, and I think it's a responsibility that we each have. This is what these rocks look like, what I just showed you. That Bakken this is a black shale right here. This is what it looks like. This one's been magnified 30 times. This is a middle Bakken. This has been magnified 50 times, and you can just barely see the little holes in it. And those little holes are the voids or the vugs. That is your porosity. Porosity is the holes. How well they're interconnected to each other is the permeability. Since that is so slow, so low, we have to frack this rock to connect those little voids and spaces so that we can get the oil and gas out of this rock. It's just absolutely amazing, the technology. What's going on now? Some of the other ones talked about this. We have about 32 active drilling rigs. Keep in mind, 32 rigs is probably what about 90 rigs did back in the boom time. We are drilling these wells so fast. And I want you to remember, even when you hear there's only 32 rigs going on, we are building out these lateral well bores, 2 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles long. Think of that, 10,000 feet down, and you're talking a 4-mile lateral is 20,000 feet sideways. You're talking a measured depth of these well bores that are 30,000 feet and longer with a little 6-inch drill bit. I mean, the technology is just amazing. We actually have a lot going on. When they talked about just in December of 2024, just this past, they were talking about, there was some news articles about how much more oil is in the next formation underneath in the Three Forks. And we've been developing the Three Forks, but there's more there than what we realized. One of the things I'm going to talk to a little bit later here, an additional 5 to 8 billion barrels of crude oil are potential with the work of enhanced oil recovery. That's incredible. Since the start of the Bakken, back around 2007, with the partial field, we have produced, last summer we hit 5 billion barrels of cumulative production out of the Bakken. Not all the legacy fields, just Bakken oil. And we're saying we can do that again with enhanced oil recovery. So let's talk a little bit. What helps us how do we get a country? How do we get a world? How do we, as oil people, as North Dakotans, do this in a more, friendly, environmentally smart way? And to do that, I refer to it as carbon management. We want to manage the carbon that comes along with this oil and gas. So we are smart about it. Carbon management, let's begin with the basics of the greenhouse effect. The sun, shines ultraviolet rays and heat down to the earth, which then bounces off. Now, some of this, last time I did this, some of this heat bounces off, but some of it is held into the atmosphere by greenhouse gases. The biggest greenhouse gas by far is water vapor, clouds. But there's also other greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. Ozone is a greenhouse gas. Nitrous oxide. These are greenhouse gases, but we need greenhouse gases to hold some of the heat into our atmosphere. Without that greenhouse gases holding the sun's heat in, the part that would bounce off would then go out into the universe, and the temperature of the surface of the earth would be about 0 degrees Fahrenheit. It would not sustain life as we know it. Right now, the average temperature of the earth, the surface, is about 59 degrees. Average worldwide is about 59 degrees Fahrenheit. That sustains us. Obviously, we can live in this environment, but without the greenhouse gases to hold some of that heat in there. So what's the challenge? Finding the balance, not having too much greenhouse gases that we heat the planet, but not get rid of all of them, that we don't keep ourselves warm enough. And a lot of the times I refer to this as just a balance. It's a balancing act. How do we use the carbon? The carbon, we learned this back in grade school. We breathe out CO2. Industrial sources put out CO2. Plants need it. Trees need CO2. And I know when we were early on talking about this discussion about CO2 and carbon management, some of the questions, had to dealt with, well, we don't have enough. We can't use the CO2 for enhanced oil recovery or carbon sequestration. We need it for the plants. Believe me, we have enough CO2 for all the trees in the world. Take my word for it. We have more CO2. We do need ways to use our CO2, but we have plenty of CO2. But it is all part of the life cycle and the carbon cycle. Now, let's get back to our stratigraphic column. This is kind of a cross-section of North Dakota. Just look at this as the western part of the state over to the eastern side, and you're looking at it head-on, and this is what the basin looks like. So when you hear the Williston Basin, it is a deep basin. Over on your beautiful NDSU campus, the value and the beauty of North Dakota is right at the surface in that beautiful land and that you farm. Here in the western part of North Dakota, as we're sitting in probably one of the deepest parts of the Williston Basin, the deepest part is really up around Keene, a little bit north and east of here. The deepest part is going to be down around 16,000 feet of depth. This is Precambrian granite rock. This is sedimentary rocks that have been deposited down into this basin over time. So we're talking about 600 million years ago, these rocks, sediments were laid down all the way up to our Bakken at about 360 million years, and then the other rocks getting shallower and getting younger in age, typically. It's also it's a basin that has not been overturned, like the Rockies and everything. It's pretty much what we call cake layer geology. You keep drilling down through the same layers. What is the capacity? What's the benefit we have? This Broom Creek Formation, I already showed you the pieces of the rock. These are going to be our storage. The Dakota, the Inyankara Formation, this is where we're going to put the CO2 and currently are doing it for permanent sequestration. And remember, the word sequestration, when you talk about like a a jury that's being sequestered. They are put away, don't come out. Carbon sequestration is permanent storage. We are not going to pull that carbon back out of the ground and use it. The main reason is because carbon sequestration is being done now, and it is being done with tax credits. So anybody who received their tax credit, if they were to pull that CO2 back out of the ground, if they could, they would have to give back the money. They're not going to do that. So permanent sequestration, when we talk about CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, CCS would be the storage component. We're doing it right now. My company, Neset, has been very fortunate. We are engineers and geologists, and we've designed these wells, several of these, what we call stratigraphic test wells, to go down and core a lot of this rock and this formation to learn about the rock and to learn what's going on with the storage, and to be able to take carbon from industrial purposes and store it underground permanently. This is a lot of work that's being done. And I look at that when I see what we're doing in CCS, carbon capture and storage or sequestration. What we're learning there, we will take to enhanced oil recovery. And I think that's really where the big value to North Dakota is, and the big prize is in the enhanced oil recovery. Now, if you live in a world that you want no fossil fuels, and you live in a world that you do not want to have oil and gas or coal or any of these things, then I also say, you probably should turn off your hot water, shower. Oh, wait a second, you don't get a shower, you don't get a building. In order for society to continue, we want to be smart about carbon management. And this is one of the ways. By handling carbon sequestration and putting the carbon away, we are learning and we are building out the pipelines and the infrastructures that will take us to enhanced oil recovery. I like to keep an open mind on this. I think we want to be smart about what we do with these natural resources. We were talking over here, Aaron and Bill and all, we need to think, some of our earlier speakers, I think Jason and Justin both talked about how you treat these things like CO2, water, produced water, oil, gas, coal. These are commodities. These are value. Even the CO2 has a value to us. Let's not treat it as a byproduct, as a waste. Treat it as a commodity that is needed, and it is needed. So let's look a little bit about enhanced oil recovery, and what are we talking about? I'll start out by telling you, we have the producing well over here. So this is our producing well, and we have those drilled right now. We can use these wells with enhanced oil recovery. If you take the oil out of this zone, whether it flows out of the oil producing zone naturally, you put a pumping unit, a pump jack on it, and you pump the oil out, any of those, or it just naturally flows, that is primary recovery. Once we get into adding something like pushing water, just water, into an injector well and pushing oil, that's called secondary recovery. If you use something other, like CO2 or gas or natural gas, that is called tertiary recovery. And that's what we're developing right now, tertiary recovery. We're talking about enhanced oil recovery. Now we take one of these oil wells or drill an injection well, and we then pump our CO2 down into the oil zone, and we have a water mix ahead of it. What happens is we're proving in the lab that the CO2 becomes miscible with the oil. What does that tell us? Injected CO2 encounters the trapped oil in the rock. So after we've pumped all we can pump out of these wells, we've only taken about 12% of the oil, maybe 14%. Think about that. You're leaving 86% of the oil underground. What's the hardest part about an oil field? Finding it. We found it. Now we want to figure out, how do we get more oil out of it? If we're only getting 14% or 12% or 10%, we're leaving a lot of oil down there. How do we do it? Enhanced oil recovery. So the CO2 goes underground, encounters the oil droplets, CO2 and the oil mix together. The miscibility is the ability of that oil to flow. You make it able to flow better. You're adding pressure to the zone also. The oil expands and moves towards the producing well. You're doing two things. You're changing the miscibility of that oil. You're making it flow better. You're also pumping CO2 in, which is adding a gas to the reservoir, which is increasing the pressure, which is helping to push and produce that oil. You then have a pumping unit over here, and you can now pump more oil out of the ground. Another little picture here just shows the same thing, the CO2 injector well, production well, and just remember that some of that CO2 does come back up to the surface. Some stays down in the rock, some comes up to the surface, it's separated, it goes back down. Eventually, in an enhanced oil recovery project, all the CO2 is left down hole. We refer to this, people call it greener oil. I kind of like to call it cleaner oil than green, but whatever you want to call it. This is a way, by working through carbon management, we're able to take the CO2 from the oil industry and make oil cleaner. Size of the prize. Why do we want to do this? We want to do it because there's a lot of oil down there. Look at this beautiful facility that we are in. What built this? Oil. What built the Legacy Fund? Oil. What did the Legacy Fund build? It built the Fargo diversion around the city of Fargo with Legacy Fund dollars. This is good for all of us, not just me living on a farm by Tioga, North Dakota. Everybody around this state benefits by this asset, by this resource that we have. Let's look at the size of the prize. Originally, we were talking about 300 billion barrels of oil, OOIP, original oil in place. Continental always had bigger numbers, and I always wondered why. Why did they come up with bigger numbers than the state of North Dakota calculated, the USGS calculated, Continental Resources? It's quite easy. They took the next formation down and they included that in their calculations. And guess what? They're right. The Bakken oil system charges up the Bakken and the underlying Three Forks formation. Remember I told you about that little article that was out in December of 2024, just a couple months ago? The Three Forks formation has a lot of oil in it. It's all part coming out of Bakken shale though. So technically recoverable. That means with what we can do right now, how much oil can we get out of it? Technically recoverable, the USGS was saying 4.3 billion barrels. Look how much technology has changed. We've already gotten 5 billion barrels out, and we haven't even started enhanced oil recovery. Look how much. I mean, I just look at this and I'm just like, holy smokes, it keeps changing. Let's say, I just used the number, 12% recovery. We're only getting 12% of the oil out of the rock. That means 88% of it is still down there. How do we get more? If we can do enhanced oil recovery, and let's just say we bring it up 20%, 20% of 12 brings you to 14.4% recovery. Still not very good, but it's better. Take 20% of what we've already gotten out, and if we improve that by 20%, we have another billion barrels of oil that we can get out. Think about that. Another billion barrels, but that's only by increasing 20%. The EERC and oil companies that are working together are saying that we can do much greater than that. We can get up to 18% recovery, 20% recovery, 22% recovery. They are talking of an additional 5 to 8 billion barrels recoverable oil out of the Bakken formation with enhanced oil recovery. We're back to needing CO2. And you know what? We need more CO2 than what we have in North Dakota. So when people start talking about North Dakota becoming carbon negative, I'm not saying carbon neutral. Carbon neutral, we just use what we produce. Carbon negative means we need to get CO2 from other states. We need it from other sources in order to enhance this Bakken oil field. Now, I know this is a reclamation conference. I get it. And we do have to be able to reclaim everything that we produce. But I also think that we can do this very wisely. And we do that by doing exactly what all of us are doing here is we're learning from one another, and we continue to go home and we try to learn more about these processes. Let's look a little bit. Permian Basin, 1974. That's where CO2, enhanced oil recovery, began. And how did they do it? They had to bring CO2 from Colorado, CO2 supply pipelines from Colorado and New Mexico into West Texas, into the Permian Basin, in order to create enhanced oil recovery out of the Permian. They've been doing it since 1974. This is not new technology. The CO2 comes from sources Colorado and New Mexico. They have put away more than 850 million tons of CO2 in their quest for enhanced oil recovery. Let's look at another one, the Weyburn Field. Weyburn is in Saskatchewan. The formation that they're pumping the CO2 into for enhanced oil recovery is not a horizontal shale formation. It is called the Midale Formation, which is part of the Mission Canyon. We did lots of Mission Canyon drilling over the years. We refer to that as the legacy formations. Anything that's non-Bakken is kind of referred to as legacy. So we have up into here into Saskatchewan, they have the Weyburn oil field. The sources of the CO2 come from North Dakota. Since 2010, I believe it is. I don't know if you know, Commissioner Goring, when the pipeline taking CO2 off Great Plains gasification. 2002. So we're talking over 20 years. The CO2 has been leaving North Dakota, Dakota gasification, going to the Weyburn oil field to produce enhanced oil recovery out of the Midale Formation. And it goes right up here. And guess what? It crosses my farmland. It has been there for over 20 years. You would never know it. That pipeline was put in. I came to North Dakota. I am a proud, well, Jersey girl. It's still a good state. It's very different from North Dakota, but that's a whole nother story. This pipeline goes right over, crosses Neset land, goes on into Saskatchewan, into Weyburn, and it also, the other source is the Boundary Dam power plant. These two plants produce the CO2 that goes into that enhanced oil project. What do we need? We want to gather investment. Aaron, this is why you invited me here. Well, how do we get investment? I tried to use a little bit different thinking, of a little bit broader thinking. We are the investment. You and me. This is our North Dakota. We need to do what we're doing, educate ourselves. We need banking regulations that will help investors invest in North Dakota. That is something that hasn't happened in some of the years past. If you remember hearing, fossil fuels will be gone off the radar completely. Okay, I don't think that's going to work so well because there's one missing part. We don't have the replacement yet. So you can't really do away with fossil fuels. You can't do away with your coal electric generation. You can't do any of those things because we don't have the replacement. But we also need people to invest, and we need banking regulations. We need a smart legislature. We are the legislature. Our legislators are amongst us. Anybody in the room a legislator, state legislator? Okay, we're all wannabe state. Tax department. We need fair tax assessment. We need to be able to look at this fairly. Higher education. I also say, thank you, Aaron. So we're okay? All right. You know, I did serve on the State Board of Higher Education. I have an absolute passion for education. I think it's very important. What we do is we educate ourselves, we educate our children, fact-based. I'm also a believer, everybody makes up their own mind how you want it. If you like fracking, you don't like fracking. All I say, get the facts. Make sure you understand how fracking works before you tell me don't do it. Because I know how it works, and I know the Hess well that's about 1,100 feet from my front door by farmhouse is very safe. And it's been producing for probably 10 years. and my water is absolutely fine. I know what's going on that well. Educate ourselves. Make sure we are growing our own scientists and engineers, our geologists, our geophysicists, our petrophysicists, all of our engineers. Let's grow our own. Keep them right here in North Dakota. What's our greatest resource? Our youth, our children. And it doesn't mean, I think I remember driving the driveway here just a couple hours ago coming in here, and is it the Bakken Area Skills Center? What a fabulous facility. I have toured that. I have been in that. We have multiple career tech academies around this state. What a wonderful way to teach our young people how to get a skill that they can put right to work. And if they want to go and continue on with that four-year degree, we have that available to them with so many connections between NDSU, UND, and our other four-year campuses, not just the research universities. Gathering investment out in the field. What is this going to take? The biggest thing is that word. We are going to need to have gathering lines. Gathering lines are also known as pipelines. So before people go and say no to a pipeline, I think it's important that you understand how important these pipelines are. I live on a farm, gravel roads up to my place. I lived through the where everything was trucked, where we didn't have any of the pipelines or the gathering. It didn't matter whether it was an oil truck, whether it was a water truck, or whether it was a rig moving truck, they were all over the place. And to get the pipelines in place so that we reduce the truck traffic was huge. I'm not even talking about the safety part of that. If you talk about the safety and getting those trucks off the road, then we got to the rail facilities. Better, not great. Now we're into pipelines. I say, let's educate ourselves to smart pipes and how we can do this. I am totally against eminent domain as a way to gather land for this. I think that these companies can be very smart, respect us as North Dakota citizens, and make sure that we get our pipelines in place so that we are at the cutting edge. We are the state. North Dakota is the one leading the way with carbon sequestration, enhanced oil recovery, and then how do you get back to reclaiming this land back to a beautiful landscape? We can do it all. We need distribution lines. You not only have to get the CO2 off of the wellbores, you have to get it back out there to re-inject. We need gathering lines. We need distribution lines. We also need surface infrastructure. CO2 is a gas at normal atmospheric conditions. If you compress it and have compressor stations, doesn't take a lot of compression, about 1,500 PSI, which is about what your power washer does when you wash your car or your tractor or whatever. So about 1,500 PSIs, you compress CO2 into a liquid phase. You can then pipeline CO2, which is exactly what the Summit Carbon Solutions is trying to put in place to bring CO2 for carbon sequestration, permanent sequestration. So we need to know what these different things are and how they can safely be done. Recycling. Erin, you and I talked a little bit about how important recycling is. This is all part of the reclamation discussion that we should have. What do we do with these commodities? What do we do with the water that is created? Remember, when you produce an oil well, you get oil, gas, and water. What do you do with that water? We want to recycle that water. We want to use that water. We can use it in industrial. We can use it to frack the next well nearby. We can use that water to help cooling at these data centers that, Claire, you were talking about. It's just so important that we get into upgrades to fluid handling systems. Yes, we need to do better at handling, and this is all part of the reclamation process. And how do we get ourselves from where we are today to tomorrow? How do we get to the future? And how do we do it responsibly when we have been gifted and blessed with these natural resources? Each one of us has a responsibility to not just lock them away. Theodore Roosevelt talked about that. The idea is that we use these resources responsibly for the greater good. EOR, once again, same thing, another cool little picture. CO2 goes downhole, goes into the oil zone, and helps bring more oil out. There have been a fair number of different projects that have already gone into field testing. We've tested in the lab. We're doing this in the field. We are very close to bringing commercial to scale enhanced oil recovery. Probably another 12, 18 months out, and you'll see it more widespreadly used. Carbon dioxide, they say, dissolves. This is the part where it builds the miscibility layer. It repressurizes the wellbore, because if you think about it, we're going back into reservoirs that have been depleted, not fully depleted, but at least by pumping or flowing them, for the last 10 years, the pressure has dropped. Adding CO2, this pressure comes back up. Some of these will come in, they'll produce oil, water, you separate and you use that CO2. And like I say, this is just a big loop. Eventually, the CO2 will all remain underground, just as it does with the current carbon sequestration. As I wrap up here, EOR, Enhanced Oil Recovery in North Dakota Legacy. Remember I said the legacy formations are the non-Bakken formations. So these are any of them that you're familiar hearing, as I talked about. The Mission Canyon Formation. Of that, you have the Neset Formation, you have the Midale Formation, the Ratcliffe, all of those. You have the Nisku, the Duperow, the Interlake, all of these formations, Red River. Those are all legacy formations. In just legacy formations, we have figured out, estimated, that by requiring 350 million tons of CO2, we can get another 1 billion barrels of oil out of those non-Bakken rocks. What about the Bakken? Enhanced oil recovery, we talked about this, 1 billion barrels of incremental oil from legacy. We can do 3.7 billion, we estimate, out of Bakken formation rock. That's a lot of oil underground. There's a lot of work to be here. So when I talk about this and we visit on it and we talk to our children, I say this is generational. We are talking decades of work. There may only be 32 or 31 rigs out there drilling right now, but what's happening with those rigs is we are putting so many horizontal wellbores into the inventory. And what happens with those wellbores? They're mechanical. They have pumps down there. They have to be maintained. Where are we seeing the biggest increase in workers and work needed and workforce is in the production side of this oil field. It's not the drilling. The drilling goes so fast. You only need 5, 6 guys to run a drilling rig. But boy, I'll tell you, when you turn around and start maintaining an oil field, that is what takes a lot of men and women, and it takes a lot of, it's a lot of work. I see decades of work yet to do here in this Bakken oil field. And with that, I say thank you very much.
I just want to understand the injection sites a little more. Is there a certain distance that they have to be from the wellhead?
What they're
and then existing that injection sites can use, or what's that?
You know what? That's going to vary with the rock downhole. They'll design that. Let me go back to Cedar Creek Anticline is southwestern North Dakota. That's the Red River Formation. This is the one that Shell originally drilled. Encore ended up picking it up, drilled lots and lots of producing horizontal wells in the Red River Formation. What they did, that was a conventional oil field that you literally could just put your drill pipe, your straw, your casing down in and produce oil out of it. So it's a conventional oil field as opposed to the oil shales. They had to put those they actually used old vertical well bores and changed them into injection wells. They were pretty close to the original, to the producing well bore, and there would be multiple injectors around it. Now, if we go into our Bakken formation and we're talking about wells that have been fracked, there's different rock qualities even across western North Dakota, and they'll space those out based on the permeability or the how much they've drained out of that field. So I'm going to say they're very, very set numbers how far they're spaced. but it's going to change from field to field or area to area.
They're kind of a typical, are we talking a mile?
No, you're talking because thinking you're going to stay inside of a drilling spacing unit. And, our 1280 acres, so you have to stay within, however they're going to, and they may unitize is what they'll end up doing, is unitizing these. So you're going to be, right now, if you do a well bore on a pad, or on an eco pad, you have multiple well bores at the surface, they go down and they spread out underground. Those at the surface are like, 30, 40 feet apart. Underground, you have maybe 4, 5, 6 well bores across a mile wide. So, put that into the numbers, you're going to be put, several hundred, feet between wells to do these. And they're also, when we get into, they have to map, underground with microseismic tools in an adjacent wellbore to see where is that CO2 going. They have to be able to keep track of where all that is, and that's mappable underground with the technology we have. So the answer is going to be, they're going to be, several hundred feet apart, to, I don't know, quarter mile apart.
It's a life of a typical Bakken well, and are there Bakken wells out there that have reached that 12 and 14%? And what are they doing?
Yes, yes, and yes. There are Bakken wells that have reached their potential, and they're already down to less than 10 barrels a day of production. Some of those wells are being plugged and abandoned already. There are companies out there, Cobra Oil and Gas wants to go into these well bores, both vertical and Bakken well bores, and go into what they recall to RAWs, residual oil zones, and get some of that trapped residual oil. So your question, are there wells, Bakken wells? Absolutely. We've already plugged and abandoned many Bakken wells. A lot of the Bakken wells that also get down, if you think about it, the older ones, think of how that technology has changed, and we didn't do these stage fracks where you frack certain portions of the well bore, force the frack fluid out to the toe of the well. We didn't do that in the beginning. Now they'll go back in, they'll do different things. They may plug and abandon and re-drill the well. They may go and refrack a well. So they will remediate it. And one of the other things they'll do is they may turn around and use that for part of this enhanced oil recovery. If the well isn't making a lot of oil, maybe it's a candidate to be an injector. So, just like, the other lady there, really, it varies so much. I'll be honest with you, from company to company, oil company to oil company, to area geologically, and the spacing units that you're working in. But the how far apart and how long these last, yeah, they keep changing.